Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. Thank you. I am your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guest you've seen in The Leftovers, Nerve, Trial by Fire, and of course on The Deuce, where Emily Meade wonderfully plays Laurie Madison, a former prostitute turned celebrity porn star who in the third season finds herself at odds in an industry taking extreme liberties with her body, well-being, and mental health. Let's take a look.
Look, I can say this to you. You know how to hear it. This thing doesn't last forever. Not for anyone, not for you. With the reputation you're getting now.
Reputation because I didn't want a corn cob shoved up my ass?
It's not just that, come on.
Why don't you try sending me out for some actual legit work? I can do other stuff, you know.
I don't have those contacts.
Make some calls, this is Hollywood, right?
You're on the other side of the hill from Hollywood, in case you didn't notice. You want straight film work? You need a straight agent. I'm not gonna lie to you about who I am or what I bring.
I thought you were on my side.
I am on your side.
Everybody, please welcome Emily Meade. Let's hear it. I gotta say, in that clip, I love that scene. I love the first 3 episodes that I've seen of the new season, but in that clip, I love the quick eyebrow flip that you did. Is that something that was natural, or that you knew that you were gonna do that in that moment?
Oh, it's natural to a degree. I try to actually do that less in my life.
That's true?
Yeah, it's almost a tick at this point. How much I raise my eyebrow.
Whose face is very. You don't have a strong poker face.
I've learned to, which I'm very proud of. I think I've been learning how to have a poker face, but in general, I show a lot of my face and I move my eyebrows quite a bit.
You flick.
I do a lot of.
So if there's anything that you're questioning in a conversation, your eyebrow is immediately up without your awareness, I bet.
Well, no, now I've brought awareness to it, and that's a huge step in my maturing. But
we are starting the final season of The Deuce, the 3rd season, beginning in the tail end of '84 up until '80, and starting really in '85, right? Mm-hmm. What has it been like to be a part of this show? It's a show that I love. I love the history of New York City, of cities in general. I mean, specifically of Times Square. And like any great David Simon production, it's a very layered, intricately sort of tentacled affair in terms of how he tells the story. What has it been like for you?
It's been, I mean, on all levels. This is the longest I've ever told one story. And so it's kind of had many different, it's had a beginning, middle, and end, both on screen and off screen. And for me to actually now be at the end of it, every element of it has really come together and does feel finished, and every single thing that we set out to do does feel like it was done. And I do feel like there was a huge catharsis for me in playing this role and telling this story of kind of, letting go of a lot of things that I was connected to about this character, if that makes sense. And I don't feel sad, longing for it to be going on, but I feel very grateful for what happened. And I don't know, I feel like I told the story of Laurie Madison.
No, going into the 3rd season, it does feel like like I said, I've only seen 3 episodes, but they're really setting up the end of these stories. Mm-hmm. Laurie's story, to me, feels like it could only really go one of 2 ways. Yes. One of those 2 ways is extremely tragic, and she's already kind of flirting on that cusp of tragedy when we meet her. Mm-hmm. She has been in and out of rehab for some time in LA. How much research had you done? I mean, there are lots of women, specifically in the 80s, who within that industry, within the porn industry, I feel like had lives like that.
Yeah. By the way, I'm practicing my poker face when you fish for what's going to happen.
What are you actually feeling while I'm talking?
You'll never know. I think for me, the research was sort of, multifaceted. And in the beginning of the show, we were starting in the beginning of the 70s, so obviously that was a totally different time period. I'm starting in New York versus LA. I had kind of already always naturally gravitated towards that period, so I'd already seen a lot of films and listened to a lot of music of that time, and I kind of always feel like I had an awareness of that world. I mean, I grew up in New York, obviously in a different time, but I had an understanding of that history, both of New York and of the sex industry, but that was the main thing that we started on research with, was just, we read a book called Gentlemen of Leisure, which was about pimps and hoes of that time, and that was sort of the beginning research, but a lot of it for me has just been sort of utilizing my own emotional connections to Laurie. Obviously I have not been a porn actress, but having been a young woman who has, tried to figure out what my relationship with sexuality and sexuality as power is, and with fame and with attention and with love and codependency and all those issues, sort of just taking those and filtering them through this specific context. And then as it's gone on, sort of just naturally by being on this set and being with our writers and our creators and, kind of constantly having education about these subjects as it goes on, by the end, there was just sort of a natural, it all kind of came together, and sometimes we would actually speak to people in this industry or just read stories or just have conversations about it, but through the process of it, you just kind of pick things up along the way while also utilizing personal experience.
I mean, one of the things about Simon's work all the way back to The Wire is that there is never a demonization of the labor of any sort of industry, whether it's the sex industry or if it's the dock workers in season 2 of The Wire, or even the sort of street dealers of The Wire. There is never a demonization of the laborers within these industries at large, which is where usually our culture does demonize. We demonize the prostitutes individually. We demonize the porn actors or actresses individually, rather than going after the society writ large that sort of constructs these industries. How important was it for you as an actress to make sure that Laurie wasn't portrayed as some kind of deviant?
I mean, for me, ironically, obviously, I would not want her. I don't see her as a evil deviant, but I think for me, actually, what I had to work harder on was not wanting to portray her as a victim of life so much as a victim of herself. And I've kind of always really fought for the concept, both in the writing and storytelling, and making sure that that story stays alive, and in my perspective of her, that she's ultimately a victim to her own ego, which is ultimately her being a victim to life and the way she was raised and what she didn't have and what has happened to her. But I think, there's obviously the story of the demonized hooker. There's the hooker with the heart of gold. Right. And then, to me, Laurie is something very much in between, where, of course, she's, was once a pure-hearted child who just wanted to, be a star, and that got twisted and mutated along the way. But I believe that Laurie did have many outs and many opportunities, and she is smart and she is capable, and she could have chosen a different life, but because of her ego or because of her
Where do
fears.
you see her ego as getting in the way? How does her ego externalize in a way that gets in the way for her?
I mean, right from the first episode, we see her and we meet her as this sort of, she's presenting as this seemingly naive creature who is being picked up by a pimp, and then the, humorous turn is that she turns on him and says, oh, you see that she's actually a street-rise, prostitute who's been there. And for me, what was really fun about playing that was the layers beneath that of, like, she's pretending to be more naive than she is, but she's also pretending to be more in truth, she is a naive person who doesn't know what she's doing, but because she never wanted to allow that to exist, and she didn't want to learn, and she wanted to know better, and she wanted to be in control and in power, she wound up losing that, which I think we see all the time. People, the more you want that power and the more you want that control, the more you lose it sometimes.
We kind of see that a little bit in the 3rd season as well, where she is somewhat in a position to take more control over her role in the porn industry, but at the same time, her ego kind of gets in the way from her being able to learn that. So therefore, she maintains being in a place where she's taken advantage of consistently.
Yeah, she's very stubborn, and she's not willing to ask questions, really, and she's not willing to not know. And when you're not willing to not know, you don't get to learn. And so I feel, for me, as I kind of developed this maternal love for Laurie over time, and a lot of forgiveness for myself as a young person and being stubborn and bullheaded, and for her. And it's so kind of sad to see her over and over again, run her head into a wall and not understanding that there's something on the other side of that wall if she just was honest enough to admit she wanted to walk through the wall.
I feel like that stubborn bullheadedness is something that either comes from growing up in New York or moving to New York at a young age, where there's just so
Possibly.
much here.
Yeah.
You have to kind of be like, no, this is who I am and this is what I like.
Yeah.
And then eventually you look back and you're like, I could have let a lot more in.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I certainly when I started my life in my industry, I was like, this is the exact career I'm going to have. I'm never going to do this. I'm only going to do this. And then life happens and you realize you're an idiot for thinking that. And you have to just completely rework your concept of yourself, which I feel like Lori was never willing to do. And that's part of why it's hard for her.
You know, the third season with Lori and the porn industry has a slight parallel to, you joining the show. You brought on intimacy, or you were one of the people that brought on intimacy coordinators for the show, because there were going to be sex scenes. And Lori is now reaching this place within the industry where she is being asked to do things that she doesn't feel comfortable with, yet there is no one there really to protect her. Her agent kind of, but her agent is also exploiting and manipulating her as well. Do you think for the writers there was some sort of they took that as inspiration and used that? Did they talk to you about that?
They didn't say it. I am suspicious there was a little bit of art imitating life there, and they're David and George and all the writers are very in tune in that way, and I think they very much like to lean into what's happening in real life. So I think there absolutely was some inspiration there, and then whether that was the initial inspiration for it or not, it kind of does just naturally play out properly of, yes, any woman being asked to be sexualized in this way, it makes sense that they're going to ask these questions and feel these things. And again, the way Lori handles it is very differently, but
much more extreme with Lori.
It's more extreme and less productive. But
and it's also the least sensitive version of a film set possible,
yes.
where I think extreme intimacy coordinators would be necessary.
Yeah, I don't think the sets could exist at all with those sets could have existed with an intimacy coordinator. Period.
Take me back to the first season when that conversation started happening about the intimacy coordinator and how it came up and where you were coming from and what it felt like that to bring that to the table.
So for me, during season 1 already, I've been acting since I was 16. I've been doing sex scenes since I was 16. I've had long evolution of my relationship with that, and doing it so regularly, doing it meaning sexual content on a show, that was for the first time probably what I thought it was the most important story about sex that I was telling. So it was never that I didn't want to use sex in the story. But
it was never like they like each other, so now we need a sex scene.
Much
more
the
show is about this.
Yes, and it never was for me, but as somebody who was getting older and more honest with myself and my sensitivity and what kind of life I wanted to live and what kind of personal sexuality I wanted to have, I was finding myself, sort of like Pinocchio becoming a real boy, like transforming into this creature who felt feelings, and I didn't know what to do with them, and I'd kind of gotten myself in this situation in this career where it was hard to let those both exist, to both be sensitive and present in your sexuality, but also have to kind of put on armor and a brave face at work to tell the story. And so that happened, and I was already feeling those feelings at the end of season 1, and then in going into season 2, everything with Time's Up and Me Too exploded, and as we all know, we were having these huge conversations about sex in the workplace, and for me, I did a lot of self-reflecting and asking myself how I had perpetuated those issues by either witnessing or participating or staying silent, and to me, I didn't know that that intimacy coordinators, not sex coordinators, that intimacy coordinators were a position. They were, but I didn't know that. But I sort of on my own thought that what would make me feel more comfortable would be to have somebody who's there on set, who their main job is to help oversee and facilitate and just be there for sex scenes, like a stunt coordinator, like an animal handler, like a child chaperone, to help with extra sensitive things. So I went to the producers and to HBO and I asked for this, and it turned out that it already existed. It just wasn't being used in film and television yet, and they hired one for our show, and then HBO wound up hiring it for all the shows, and so it goes.
what does it look like interacting with an intimacy coordinator? Like, what is an example of how that relationship works on the set?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's allowed to sort of use them differently and to whatever degree they want. For me, something that I personally like, and this helped me a lot, is I've always, as many actors, I'm sure, are afraid of disappointing people or not being a team player. So for me, as much as most directors and producers have been very willing to have conversations about sex scenes and are that no one wants to upset you or force you to do anything you don't want to do, but it's sometimes hard to admit that you don't want to do something or to talk about it without fears of what you're making a person feel or revealing too much about yourself.
Which is inherently like the conflict and dynamic of any scenario on set. Even if you're just an actor with a question,
Yes.
you don't want that question to go on too long because time is money.
Yes,
You don't want the producer or the writer, who's essentially in many ways a higher position than you, to be like, oh my God, can we just get this over with? It's a really fraught dynamic at times.
Yes. And it's fraught in all areas, especially in sex, because everybody's so confused on how to talk about sex. And I feel like there's also this kind of worked-in condition feeling for actors to feel like any problem we have is a luxury problem and we're lucky to be there and we're happy, we should be grateful to be there. I'm not saying that's enforced by the specific directors, but that there's that kind of overall, like, poor little rich boy kind of concept of, like, well, you don't have to be an actor, which is true or arguable or whatever it may be.
No,
But
there is a built-in assumption about performers and people that are on camera as their job is any kind of complaint is a diva, is like some sort of diva-ish complaint, or like, come on, man, your job's easy, just get on camera and do the thing.
Yeah, it doesn't garner much sympathy. Yeah. So it definitely, I think it trains people to go one way or the other, be very extreme and have to really defend themselves or be too afraid to speak up. So for me, one of the ways I've liked to use Alicia Rodas, who's our intimacy coordinator, and she sort of started intimacy coordinators all together, but it's been very helpful, especially on the show, because not only is it hard to talk to directors about this sometimes, but we have a different director every episode. So it's like starting over again with a new person, with a new way of communicating every time.
A new director every episode?
Yes. We have some people who repeat multiple episodes, but not in a row. And it's, each episode is a new person.
Just different these days. I mean, that's similar to how it used to be done, but more often than not, shows have, we just had a show here that had 3 directors for 8 episodes, right? So each of them had a couple episodes there. Even when you did The Leftovers, I feel like you had multiple directors. No?
Yeah, but it was pretty much every episode was a different. Yeah, I mean, you have your repeat people. In some shows now, they have one director for all. I mean, I think now that TV's transformed so much, it's becoming kind of like
anything.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like they're all just different versions of a long form movie almost. But for ours, by the 3rd season, it was all directors that had already directed, so they weren't brand new. But still, even if you worked with them one episode, you're discussing a brand new sex scene in a brand new script with a person that it's not like you've been working with them for the entire story.
And also a different decade, so your character has. It's not like your character's on a new case this week. Yeah. It's the same character.
Exactly.
10 years later, she's a fading starlet in the porn industry. Yeah. She's a different person.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces. So one of the ways of having Alicia on set that's been so helpful is having her sort of be the initial person. She will talk to the director about what it is they're envisioning for the sex scene. She'll deliver that information to me so that I can have just a sort of natural, whether it's a knee-jerk reaction or just my initial reaction, without being worried about upsetting anyone or disappointing anyone, process it with her, and, sort of like a negotiation. If there's anything that I don't feel comfortable with, I can tell that to her, she can tell that to them, and then after those things are kind of on the table, then we can have a conversation that's more about the creative and not about the, like, weird, icky conversation of, often a man feeling guilty for asking you to be nude or do something, which is already, I feel bad for them. It's just an uncomfortable conversation. So that's been really helpful, but not everyone likes to use Alicia that way. But sorry.
I feel like based off of the scenes that I've seen, granted it's a different industry in the 80s, it's almost like a giant step forward that the men feel guilty for asking at this point.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like 20 years ago, there was no guilt about it at all. It was like, you signed the contract. This is what I want. Let's time is money. Let's go.
Yeah, it's a process that, of course. I mean, I always have endless empathy for men and people in general of, I know that sometimes men get a bad rep of being horrible people, even if they're not. And so I'm always
You can take it.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I go back and I've said that, but then at the same time, when I've been around people who are like, well, we can't even compliment women anymore. I'm like, well,
You're an idiot.
A, you can, and B, like maybe just now, just don't for like now, or like just let it
Gauge
transition.
what the compliment sounds like,
but
or
a lot
how
of
to
people
do
are
it.
very tone deaf. But yes, or just lay off for a minute. Things are the pendulum will swing. Things will calm down a bit. It's gonna keep changing.
Like, it's good to say, did you get a haircut? That looks nice. It's bad to say, whoa, you look great.
Yeah,
That doesn't work.
Although I don't mind being told I look great either. It's very confusing. It's so nuanced. It's really hard. It's like it's so nuanced and specific, and humans are so different, but we're all sensitive, and we have such different triggers and relationships with language and sex. Which is why I think having an intimacy coordinator or kind of like a solid, like a through line when you're dealing with all of this is so helpful, to have kind of one person who's at least there to help, just like a couples therapist or whatever, just somebody who's kind of a little more objective from the overall relationships, the creativity, the money, and to just sort of help be a through line and make sure there's consistency in how these things are run and make someone who can notice if in one episode an actor feels comfortable and then the next episode they don't seem comfortable, that there's a difference and there's maybe a reason that two different directors wouldn't notice.
Right. Whereas maybe another director would be like, but she did it before. Why not again? And I saw you this year in Trial by Fire, the Edward Zwick film, and I thought you delivered a really nuanced, beautiful performance of someone that would normally be depicted much more one-dimensionally. What was it like portraying someone of that socioeconomic status who was a part of something that they were clearly not capable of really understanding?
Mm-hmm. I mean, fun seems like a weird word to use, but I always do, and maybe it's like I feel like I often do wind up playing roles that are maybe seemingly one-dimensional, but I'm excited by the challenge of bringing empathy or layers to somebody who might not have that on paper. But to me, I always find it really fascinating playing a character through the eyes of somebody who has less knowledge or less wisdom. I'm not calling myself so wise, but has less experience than I do. And there's something fun of it's almost like, it's like finding your way through a room in the dark versus with the lights on, and there's something you find different senses in yourself, and different things are heightened.
There's more for you to explore as a person who wouldn't normally do those things. You can start asking, well, why would she respond this way? Why would she go about it this way? Yeah,
and that was really hard because this character was based on a real person, but there was so little information on this person. There was like one video clip I could find, and all we knew is that she had been in support of her husband at a time, and then she was no longer. So I had to sort of fill in the blanks of why, and to me, that's just fascinating to dive into that, and I'm not so far away from their world that I, had to like find all this research. I am, connected to that through my own personal life in my own ways. I've certainly been raised with more access to education and to psychological understanding and to emotional understanding and talking about your feelings and not just beating each other up over them, which is what
and
they
also
do.
How important your own agency is.
Yes, which is something that is unfortunately, it is a rare and, it's a lot of people don't feel that and don't have that. So, yeah, I mean, that was just such a tragic case, and to see it through her eyes and her maybe more limited perspective, I had so much empathy for her and what she had to deal with. So to me, I think maybe originally that character was seen as almost a villain, or she was somebody that she turned on her husband. But for me, I had to me, this woman who had no family, had no support system.
Was in an abusive relationship.
But also
he was innocent of the crime that he was convicted of and then murdered for, but he also was not. Like, they were in an abusive relationship.
Exactly. But even that, I think then a lot of people, like in the film, that she's on trial and they're saying, well, why are you defending this person who beat you up? It's like, well, it also was her only sense of family, and her whole life was abusive, so that was her safety zone, and that was her sense of comfort and love.
Well, you have a great line where she says, I don't know if it's when she's on the trial or earlier, where she says, he hit me, I hit him, we hit each other, which is, I mean, that's such a layered thing to depict, and I feel like that was kind of the core of your performance with this woman, which was that, like, believing that being the type of person who think that's okay.
Yeah. And going from there and being that kind of vulnerable to anything, any sign of love or safety, which is very dangerous, and I don't not relate to. And so for her to be outside in the world completely alone, having lost her husband and her children while he was in prison, to me, it made a lot of sense that she would eventually turn on him, because the only people that she had access to were telling him that her to turn on him. And also it's almost too difficult to live thinking, oh no, he's an innocent man. But it's kind of like when you have a bad breakup and you have to vilify the person, you have to find a way, like, no, that could have never worked because they had XYZ. It's too painful to be like, well, no, we both loved each other, it just, like, doesn't work. So I think she had to take that turn on the end because she had to survive. She had to, and that's, again, her limited tools, both financially, education-wise, I think is what led her there versus a more evolved spiritual path that, more privileged people could, I guess, get to.
Yeah. We have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question? Someone right here.
Hi, I think the show, actually, I just have to say this, is really underappreciated, especially the performances, even more so yours and Gary Carr's, who's my favorite on the show. And my question is, how do you separate yourself out from characters like this at the end of the day or at the end of a series? Because you mentioned that you've been with her so long, and these are not, I guess they're not the most likable individuals, especially if they're so different, obviously, than you and anybody else. So how do you go about that at the end of the day?
Well, it's different. It's case by case. I think specifically for Lori, I was kind of saying how there's a lot of it is a catharsis for me. It's less me finding research and reaching outside of myself and more me reaching into myself to the parts of me that do connect to Lori. And sort of there can be a really healing aspect of living that out fictionally through somebody else. And it's almost like the more I got to play that out with her, the more it left me. So I know different actors feel very differently, and some people are method, or some people feel like they take on the characters and it's hard for them to leave them. For me, it's more I go within to these parts of myself that connect to them, and then I go through a catharsis of letting go of that in a way. So maybe in the process of playing Lori, I definitely probably had a lot of confused feelings that I didn't always have awareness of or couldn't articulate. But now I actually feel a lot lighter, and like she's no longer living in me.
One more question.
Hello. I was wondering if you had a favorite scene or episode that you filmed this season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can say things that haven't aired yet, so I won't. But this season, I actually had a lot of fun. Basically, in the process of Lori she's trying to find other ways of existing besides porn. So she gives other things in life a try. That's all I'll say. I know. It's very sad. And
I have not seen those episodes yet, but I can already tell that
she
they're
tries
going
to be a
tragic.
chef. No, she doesn't. But in that process.
Oh my God, please tell me she releases an exercise video. Because it's the 80s.
Yeah, that would have made sense, but she didn't. Or maybe. But
and I can imagine her getting to the exercise video set, and then like halfway through, someone being like, okay, now we're going to bring the guys in.
Yeah.
We're going to start, everyone's going to have sex, and her being like, no, this, I thought we were doing.
That's not, I mean, that feeling exists. So yeah, getting to, as much as it's tragic for Lori, I am fortunately not Lori. So getting to experiment with those things and try on different hats as Lori was really actually very fun for me, as much as it was like it was a very sad thing for the story, but those were very fun things.
I love the show so much. I'm sad that it's going to be over after this season, but I'm sure they're going to wrap it up beautifully. It's been an incredible performance for 3 seasons. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The final season premieres tonight on HBO. Everybody give Emily Meade a huge round of applause for being here. Let's hear it.